the first thing I want to know is, what is civility exactly? Anybody got an idea? Anybody? Well, let's try it a different way. When you're being civil, how do you behave? Come on, come on. Now, come on, some of you must know. Show of hands, anybody, come on. I hate to call. All right.
Diplomatic cooperation.
It's a matter of?
Diplomatic cooperation.
Diplomatic cooperation. What do we mean by that? Cooperation I can get. What's diplomatic?
Being fair. Being fair.
Ah, now we're getting somewhere. And that is the essence of it, or part of the essence of it, right? Civility comes from the Latin civilis, which means, I have to take a quick look at my notes here, relating to public life, benefiting a citizen or the state of being civilized, behavior proper to civilized persons. Spaeth and Donachie put it like this: civility is claiming and caring for one's identity, needs, and beliefs without degrading someone else's in the process. Right? She was right. But, and here's where we've got a real problem. If you look at the dictionary definitions of civility nowadays, they normally focus on politeness. Being polite's only part of it, folks. It is only part of it. And if you let politeness get to the point where it is chasing out the rest of what civil behavior is about, then you've shortchanged both yourself and the people you're cooperating with, because cooperation is at the bottom of it. Civility is about disagreeing with other people without disrespect, for seeking common ground as a starting point for dialogue about differences, listening past your preconceptions. It's a little hard to do, right? And teaching other people to do the same. The whole point of civil behavior is that you're modeling behavior for other persons who are part of a community that you're cooperating in. Civility is the hard work of staying present, even with those who you have deep-rooted and fierce disagreements with. It's political in the sense that this is a necessary prerequisite for civic action. Now, I'm a political scientist. One of the things that we like to study is how people come to the decision to take political action. And believe you me, that's hard to study. Really hard. And it's hard to make generalizations about. You can get it secondhand, but about the only way you can really get around to it is to get right into, as a participant observer, if I can use the term of art, as a participant observer in people's actions themselves. And one of the things that comes through loud and clear in that is that the more people have to interact with each other and cooperate diplomatically, the more they have to do that, the more likely it is that they'll be tolerant of each other's opinions, the more likely it is that they'll be willing to compromise on policy issues, and the more likely it is that they will be effective. Now, one of the real problems that we've got in the United States today, and we'll be getting to this again, is that that kind of behavior is often difficult to find. Now, it's political too, in the sense that it's about negotiating interpersonal power so that everybody's voice is heard and nobody's ignored, but where you respect other people to the extent that if they're saying something you think is wrong and you think you have a good argument on your side, that you will uphold your opinions in dialogue with them. Now, the problem here is that it's difficult to do this. I'm going to give you Bertrand Russell's 10 Commandments about how to conduct yourself in a civilized argument with other persons. Lord Russell would be the one to know. 1, don't feel absolutely certain of anything. Boy, is that good advice. One of the real problems that we have in the country today, and one of the difficulties that you have when you try to conduct a civil discourse with anybody, is that people are so certain about what they actually know. Believe me, folks, I'm a social scientist. The first thing that I assume whenever I approach a project is that the thoughts that I have about it are going to be proven wrong. I'm teaching research methods right now, and that's one of the things I pound into people. The default in any argument is that you're wrong. That's why, in order to make an argument and make it work, you can't start by being certain about it. You have to start by assuming that you're wrong, and then assuming that what you have to do is pile up the arguments to the contrary that support yours, while at the same time, remember, preconceptions, not dismissing other arguments you hear. Second, I got to put my glasses down. Do not think it worthwhile to proceed by concealing evidence, for the evidence is sure to come to light. Boy, is that ever the truth. One of the difficulties that we have with civil discourse in the United States today is that people simply ignore evidence if it doesn't support an argument that they like. They ignore it completely. It's perfectly possible, folks, Scott's honor, for human beings to hold two completely contradictory ideas at the same time, provided they like the conclusions. One of the things that you have to do in order to become a person who exercises civility in discourse and civility in your lives is get past that. Never try to discourage thinking, for you are sure to succeed. Yeah. You will. When you meet with opposition, even if it should be from your husband or your children, endeavor to overcome it by argument and not by authority, for a victory dependent upon authority is unreal and illusory. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, gee whiz, I'm sitting here listening to somebody who I assume is an authority. I mean, they picked me for a reason. Consequently, should I accept his argument simply because he's an authority? I sure hope not. Because that would be the wrong way to accept the arguments I'm going to be making to you today. Completely wrong. If the arguments don't stand on their own, then no amount of authority will cure the problem. Have no respect for the authority of others, for there are always contrary authorities to be found. What that means is that you have to be willing to seek the truth beyond what you hear. Now, this is a real problem that we've got nowadays. We got a whole bunch of people who are setting themselves up as authorities, and then their first thing that people will say about them is, if they disagree with their arguments, is, well, gee whiz, what we need to do is look further at the question. You hear this a lot about climate change, for instance. The trouble is that most of the people who say that are not actually trying to find out more about climate change. What they are doing is they are receiving cues about how they ought to identify themselves publicly, and without preconceptions and without doing much in the way of research. Because, let me tell you folks, the research on this is conclusive. Simply accept what authorities tell them, and don't trust any authorities as a result. Well, that's correct. You know, it really is true. You shouldn't trust other authorities. You should find out for yourself. And believe me, that's a responsibility, right? Because you have to put your preconceptions aside before you do it. Don't use power to suppress opinions you think pernicious, for if you do, the opinions will suppress you. Now, what Lord Russell is saying there is that if you use power to stop people from expressing opinions, then the opinions will oppress you, because you will then be committed to a certain set of opinions, no matter whether they are useful or convenient or true or not. Don't fear to be eccentric in opinion, for every opinion now accepted was once eccentric. True enough. Find more pleasure in intelligent dissent than in passive agreement. For if you value intelligence as you should, the former implies a deeper agreement than the latter. Now that is the truth. And that's at the center of all of this. You can't respect other people's ways of thinking and respect other people's ideas unless at the same time you're willing to think further and distrust their agreement with you. Are they agreeing with you just because, and this is often the case, I might add, people will agree with you because you've got power. People will agree with you because they think that they're going to be long-term losers if they don't. Folks, there's a word for that. The word's cowardice. Be scrupulously truthful, even if the truth is inconvenient, for it is more inconvenient when you try to conceal it. Yes. At the center of all civil discourse, at the center of civility itself, is the truth as best you can find it. Now, does that mean that you're always going to be certain? Remember the first thing that Lord Russell said? Never be certain about anything. Don't even be certain about what you think is the truth. But try very, very hard to get the best arguments you can to get you closer to the truth every time. It's Paul Haynes' poem, right? What's the path to wisdom? Why, it is surely this, to err and err and err again, but less and less and less. That's the secret. And that's why civil discourse and civility is important. Don't feel envious of the happiness of those who live in a fool's paradise, for only a fool will think that that's happiness. True enough. The basic idea is a simple one here. You don't back down when you're faced with falsehood, but don't be too sure that you aren't the one who's upholding it. Make your arguments as well as you can, and don't be afraid to give offense when you do so. Now, a lot of people think that if they get involved in tough arguments with other people, now, mind you, I'm not saying that this is something that you do when you're sitting down with your friends watching a football game, right? Casual conversation is one thing. Serious discussion is another. When you get into serious discussions, then the expectation should be that you're not worried too much about hurting people's feelings or disrespecting them if what you think they're saying is wrong. The truth, folks, as best you can determine it, is at the center of civility. It's not civil to let falsehoods pass unrefuted. And it's dishonest not to put your own best arguments for the truth forward as best you can conceive them. Now that brings me to the next subject, and the one that the talk is about: civility and democracy. There's a basic contradiction there. Now, and till the very recent past, and I'm leaving out classical civilization here, but medieval and then early modern and modern civilizations in Europe, civility was not something that was expected of most people. Nobody expected the common people to be involved in decisions of public consequence, and as a consequence, nobody expected them to be civil, except, of course, to their betters. As democratic institutions came more and more to include what we call in the poli-sci biz mass publics, that's you people, it became more and more difficult to maintain within the bounds of free speech civility. Consider this. Rejoice this morning that a clear, clean, courageous voice booms through the miasma of double talk and parliamentary pussyfooting. And who? Colonel George Edward Cecil Whig, Labor MP for Dudley, is whom? The gallant soldier is afraid to reveal nothing except his age and who's who, in a right, rich, juicy language that turns blue the fusty, old-school tie air of Westminster. Hail the Billingsgate battler, applaud the vitriolic veteran. 3 cheers for the swashbuckling swatty. Hats off to the red-faced redcoat. Who are the mealy-mouths, the tender-skins, the baby-talkers, who blanch at Whig's wigging? The phrases he uses go back to the honest, outspoken, earthy tradition of Tom Jones. I'm just going to read one of the quotes. The Prime Minister and his virile team can face the insult that he is, quote, not fit to black the boots of the dirtiest private who ever took the Queen's shilling. There are several of these. And if they could not, they would not be worthy of the Mother of Parliaments. Colonel Whig does not hide his aims. If I'm being offensive, by God, I'm trying to be, he trumpeted. Can he take it as well as dish it out? Of course he can. When the Spectator called him a blank, 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 did he run to his lawyers? Yes, as a matter of fact, he did. What then, this verbose and agitable morning, do we call Colonel George Edward Cecil Whig? We call him a slack-jawed, bleary-eyed bag of condemned offal. We call him a pot-bellied, weak-bladdered, beef-brained load of old crapulence. We say he looks like a camel, grunts like a pig, talks like a toucan, gibbers like an ape, thinks like a stoat, and brays like a jackass. He is offensive, reeky, fetid, moldy, rancid, maggoty, scruffy, maculate, slimy, clinkerous, superating, dungy, putrid, overflow of a cesspool. He is a pompous, self-adoring, humorless bog-trotter who cannot bear to take 1/1000th of the infantile abuse he hurls at his opponents under the cover of parliamentary privilege. Didn't sound very civil, did it? But think about what they're doing. Would it have done them any good to get Colonel Whig into an argument, a rational argument about what he was saying? The answer is no. No more than it would have made sense to argue with a stormtrooper. What they're trying to do in this is use invective, and believe you me, this is English, they're the best in the world at it. Use invective to shame Colonel Whig into civil behavior. Would society be better off if we put this kind of invective, based, mind you, on true statements, actual verbatim quotes, out of bounds? My answer is no. No, it wouldn't. There's a limit to civility as a value in democracy, and that limit is free speech. I might add, too, that this is the United States Supreme Court's opinion. Some of you may have wondered why people who are in the public eye don't sue folks who accuse them of terrible things in the public press or on television. The reason is that in New York Times v. Sullivan, the court held that you can't sue, that a person who is a public figure can't sue someone for libel in journalism unless they can prove that the person who actually wrote the article or did the newspaper or did the television show was in fact lying and knew it. Good luck on proving that. So what's the protection of civility, folks, in a world where courtesy is often wanting and free speech is an absolute requirement? There is one. Civic virtue. Plutarch tells us that when the Thebans invaded Sparta in 362 BC, they almost got into the city. A young Spartan peer, you can ask me what that means later, a fellow named Acitus, was taking exercise in the gymnasium in the city at the time, heard the Thebans come in, and ran out to meet them naked except for a spear and a sword that he grabbed from bystanders. He threw himself at the Thebans and so surprised and overawed them that he almost drove them out of the city single-handed. After the fight was over, the Euphors, the people who ruled Sparta, the judges, immediately gave him a civic crown for bravery. Then they did something that you wouldn't find happening in the United States these days. They fined him 1,000 drachma for going into battle without putting his armor on, because that was a violation of the law and a violation of his citizen's duty. When we talk about civic virtue, we're talking about citizens putting aside their private lives and interests and serving the community in accordance with their duties defined by the law and their responsibilities to one another. It's at the center of a lively civil discourse. That means that you got to give up partisan advantage and personal gain when the public interest is at stake. That means that you have to cooperate in standing up for the community as a whole. That means, folks, that you have to talk to other people in the community and talk to them in a civil fashion in order to find out what that civic virtue actually is. That's not easy. It's not, especially not easy in a country like ours. The people who came up with the idea of civic virtue usually lived in city-states with no more citizens than you found in LaGrange, Georgia, where you could know everybody and get a pretty good idea about what people's actual interests are. Try that in a country with 25 million people in it, concentrated in cities of enormous size, most of them, spread out all over creation with different interests and different ways to cooperate, or different values that they want to achieve through cooperation. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't try? No. One of the tragedies of our public life is that we have too few people who do try to reach that kind of community feeling. The essence of civility, in my opinion, is a willingness to call on your fellow citizens to follow the public interest and providing them arguments that will direct them to it. That, in turn, folks, is connected to a rational discourse done civilly, right? Remember Lord Russell's Decalogue? Aimed at elucidating the truth. And folks, now we get to it. The basis for that has to be in education. It's education properly conducted that fosters the knowledge, the respect for others, and the fierce protection and promotion of the truth without fear or favor that should be at the center of civil discourse in a democracy. Now, sometimes that'll require us to admonish the Colonel Whigs in our midst. Sometimes shaming is the only thing that'll work. Further, you shouldn't use this as a bludgeon to repress free speech. We've had several instances of that recently in academia. Remember Lord Russell's sixth admonition? Don't use power to suppress opinions you think pernicious, for the opinions will suppress you. Now, folks, that's the reason why we make civility one of the values that we try to promote here at LaGrange College. And that's the reason why it's your responsibility, yours, not ours. Take a look at me, ma'am. Right? I'll be gone soon. It's going to be up to you to create that civil society, and it's going to be up to you to acquire through your education the capability to conduct civil discourse with each other and to behave with civility towards one another. Thank you. That's sort of along the same lines as what do you do if everybody on your street is committing adultery? The answer is that you have to model the behavior for others. Sure, occasionally they will not pay attention. You know, trying to conduct civil discourse in Nazi Germany was a loser from the start. Right? You're not going to be able to do it. Many people who were civil simply dropped out of public life altogether because they felt that there was no other alternative for them. Others gave in to the Nazis, and usually for the wrong kinds of reasons, right? Not rational ones. In situations like that, the road that you have to follow is a tough one. But you have to try. Right? The most civil person that I know of in Nazi Germany was what was his name? Not von Falkenhayn. The Count who tried to kill Hitler with the bomb at Ravensburg. Sometimes that's the only way.